Hi everyone, welcome to HexCon 20. Hope you're having a great time here. We are about to kickstart the session on Zero Trust and the future of UEM. Now, Zero Trust is poised to emerge as a security model of choice for enterprises, and yet there is a lot of skepticism around its strategy, governance, and architecture. Security leaders and IT decision makers have to plan moving away from conventional perimeter-based approach to an identity-driven security model, and they usually end up not knowing where to begin. Today we have with us Dr. Chase Cunningham to talk about Zero Trust and how it fits into the overall scheme of unified endpoint management. Dr. Cunningham is a principal analyst at a leading global research firm, cybersecurity leader, speaker, and the author of Cyber Warfare, Truth, Tactics, and Strategy. He's an expert, if not the face of Zero Trust. He has been pioneering Zero Trust for over a decade. Not just as an advocate of philosophy, but taking it from strategy to reality. Welcome, Dr. Cunningham.
Hey, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us. Now, we have a lot of questions and uncertainty around Zero Trust. We'll try to cover most of it in this rather short session, but I'm sure he can straighten out those misconceptions and offer a clear implementation path forward. So let's start with a bit of history. Even though Zero Trust term is relatively modern, the principle behind it has its roots more than a decade-old efforts of establishing a secure framework for cloud computing and the so-called deperimeterization. Zero Trust as a model too has seen a lot of changes over the years. Dr. Cunningham, could you walk us through the evolution of Zero Trust?
Sure. So Zero Trust is something that a lot of people will say it's new. It's only been around for a couple of years, and that's fundamentally wrong. Zero Trust strategically has been around for almost 17 years. Goes all the way back to 2003, 2004. There was a group of researchers called the Jericho Forum that were basically a bunch of CISOs and security leadership that were thinking about what would security look like when we moved outside of a perimeter-based model. And at that time, it was really about network access control, firewall, and sort of VLAN segmentation. And it was called deperimeterized security. So 17 years ago, it was basically known as deperimeterized security. Now, the evolution into the term Zero Trust happened around 2009, 2010 timeframe when an analyst named John Kindervag said, that makes a lot of sense. This is where the evolution of this is going, but deperimeterized security is kind of a mouthful. So what if we really looked at the fundamental issues within the infrastructure itself and figured out what we're removing, which is trust relationships, and we got rid of that. And then he coined the term Zero Trust. And from there, it's continued to evolve over the last decade to where it is now, which is really more about identity, endpoint, user, device, those types of things. The network is critical, core component, those type of things. However, if you look at the areas for access, the way that we cause compromises, the way that things go bad, it doesn't start with a firewall. It starts with a user and a device, which is where the evolution of this space continues to go. So it's important to understand there's a long history for Zero Trust. It's not new. It's not a buzzword. This has been evolving, and that's a really actually a very good thing.
Great. So, as for an organization planning for Zero Trust journey, there are various areas they can start with. But when operating on limited budget and resources, it is important to go with one that offers a good ROI. Where do you think enterprises should focus the early efforts on?
Well, there's kind of a curve here. So if you're an organization that's been, heavily compliant for a long period of time, you probably have solved a lot of what we would consider to be more basic areas of cybersecurity. So if you're an organization that's been doing that, like big mega banks and big government, it's probably more into the encryption sort of issues, the big data sort of side of the equation. However, the majority of organizations really should focus on solving relatively binary problems first. And why I say binary is because what you're looking at there is users and devices, UEM-ish type of things, that those are where compromises occur. The good thing is that the solutions for those are there. HexNode's got types of offerings that solve those problems where you're basically saying, if this looks anomalous, stop it from occurring. I need to know who the users are, where they're going, what they're doing, what they're accessing, and have some ability to control that endpoint or that device. And that's what we're trying to get to, is making sure that users are going to be more protected. And it's not necessarily that difficult. This is, when I say binary, if something looks anomalous or something looks like it could be indicative of a threat, you simply segment it and stop it till you can respond and figure out what's going on. And it sounds like that's a really big problem, but the capabilities in the space, the evolution of technology, the offerings from vendors are making this where it is achievable.
Mm-hmm. So identity and access management is quintessential, but then again, the idea of micro-segmenting, trying to implement it in a small, in the small pieces first and working your way up, organizations usually have a hard time getting it right. They tend to run into practical limitations when going more and more granular with their internal networks and data entities. Do you see a way around it?
Well, I think what you get to is that there becomes kind of a line of sanity in the space, right? Where you're trying to get to, I can have segmentation, which means control, and I can have things at a granular sort of level of capability. And when you get towards that state, what you're doing is you're limiting the blast radius of an attack, and that's what we're trying to get to. If you look at the major compromises that have happened over the last X number of years, the Maersk, the Norsk Hydro, the other mega breaches that have happened, it wasn't because they didn't have segmentation. They had VLANs, they had network firewalls, that type of thing. It was because they weren't segmented and isolated down to a controllable level. Essentially, what you have to do is look at the enterprise and figure out, if things went really, really wrong, what am I willing to lose? People talk about the calculation of risk and that type of approach, when what you should be doing is saying, I understand that the risk is inherent. As long as I'm sending electrons, I am at risk. What I'm actually focused on is limiting control of the adversary when they get into that network. And when you do that, you go to granular sort of segmentation and are able to control what's going on inside of that infrastructure. Because one of the primary comments and tenets for ZT is you're going to have a compromise. That's a given. The way that you approach that is you say, what am I willing to deal with when that happens? And that's where segmentation comes into this. And it can be very problematic if you try and go too far down the rabbit hole, because then the network becomes unusable.
Well, when it comes to cybersecurity, SMPs aren't the usual early adopters. A zero trust model is no different. Apart from the obvious budget constraints, SMPs tend to hold back with the notion of security, slowing down their momentum. So, do you have a blueprint for small and medium businesses?
Well, what they should really be doing, and you kind of see this already, and that's where the growth of ZT is coming in, is they should be looking at the big enterprises and saying, how can I leverage that same strategic approach, which is around zero trust, but make it specific for them? This is the good thing about a real strategy that's actually applicable, is you're able to kind of piecemeal it and make it work for you. Now, no one's going to tell a 5-person company that they should do the same things a mega bank does. However, they should at least approach the problem from the same mindset of, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to solve the problem, and we'll align technology to get there. What you're trying to get to is to have everyone operating at a relatively level playing field where the SMBs are doing the same thing mega enterprises are, because what we want is lots and lots of hard targets. You're never going to be perfect, but you just have to be better than the next weak target. And if you really approach that and you think about how you can map technology into that strategic initiative, you can start to gain ground there. And I think what a lot of times, to your point, people in small and mid-sized enterprises will say is, I'm not a target, I'm a small business, I don't have to do this big sort of security stuff that the government or the mega banks do, when in reality, that's exactly where they go. I mean, it used to be that the adversaries went after the big enterprises. Those big enterprises have had about 10, 15 years to kind of get more secure. Well, that means that the adversary goes towards the easy target. I talked about this in my book. They move downstream, and if you're downstream, they're coming for you. So, the last thing is, everyone has to understand and be real about it. Like, because of the fact that you're doing business in a digital manner, you are in an avenue of compromise. And if you approach it in any other way, you are guaranteeing bad things will happen.
Right. On the flip side, what about enterprises that are already invested heavily in cybersecurity? They have a clear vision of how their information security management is going to evolve and could have set up their infrastructure along the certain lines. Now, they are already moving towards healthier security posture. So, how does Zero Trust going to affect such organizations?
So for those big enterprises, like you said, they've already solved a lot of these problems. They've kind of got things down into a plan and a plot. And really where they see the benefit around Zero Trust is there's a translation that occurs between security objectives and capabilities and business objectives and capabilities. And that's where, like when I do workshops with these really large organizations talking about this, the thing is not to talk necessarily about security technology and capability anymore. We're talking about how a strategy enables an outcome, and that's something that business leaders understand. And when you get to those really large organizations, they get the value of a business aligned strategy that will help things do better. Interestingly enough, we see with statistics and data that say that organizations that engage in effective security strategy, employees are happy, they generate more revenue, they have less time spent trying to solve for security. So there's a clear business benefit here, and that's what helps organizations understand. If you do these things, especially if you're at a large enterprise level, there are clear outcomes and objectives that can help you. But it is not necessarily about more technology, more security, more budget, whatever. It's really about you do these things because they make sense, they solve the physics of the problem, and strategically you can align this with the goals of the business, and that resonates.
Exactly. So, the device management industry has evolved many times in the past few decades. When things first started, terms like MDM, MAM were being coined together. Device management meant mostly syncing calendars on user devices or a way for the admin to enforce a specific password. As for the enterprise got more sophisticated, the security and threats became just as mature and complex. So the industry changed from baseline device management and to tailoring specific policies based on user roles. Now system admins can manage apps, content, access, risk, and so much more under one central unified console. With the integration of identity and access management, UEM is now at a strategic inflection point. So there may be multiple answers as where UEM can go from here. We foresee all roads leading to Zero Trust security. Dr. Cunningham, do you share our vision? Is Zero Trust the centerpiece in the future of UEM?
Yeah, I think UEM and identity and access management are tied at the hip. I mean, users are what cause compromises. Devices are what users use to cause compromises. Therefore, if you're going to apply controls intelligently, you solve for those things first. The most secure network on the planet is one that no user or no device ever touches, and that's just not how we do business. You have to apply controls to users and devices, and this is not about the draconian, I'm not going to allow you to do things that you need to do for personal issues or whatever. This is about, I'm protecting my business. You are the wheel around which this whole thing revolves. So I will apply controls intelligently to you that allow me to have an ability to respond. And I mean, from my home right now, I'm sitting here on my Microsoft Surface. I've got my iPhone. I mean, those are two devices that I could use that, if they're not managed correctly, could easily introduce an avenue of compromise into my corporate infrastructure, which is a really, really bad thing. And it's not because I'm trying to do that. It's not because I have some Machiavellian purpose. It's just because it's hard to keep up with all the patches, all the controls, all the capabilities you need to operate and keep those devices safe and secure and take care of the user and my identity and all the other things that go along with it. So if that's the reality, it only makes sense that we apply controls and that the market in general says that this is the problem that we must solve. There are other things that we can get to, but if you're trying to defeat the adversary at the front lines, trying to limit compromises and limit breaches, solve for those things and solve for them repeatedly across time. Don't just try and solve for post-quantum encryption when people are still using unpatched, unmanaged devices to access your infrastructure.
In our experience, organizations that integrate their existing identity providers into UEM and deploy user-based policies tend to have a healthier security posture overall, with better visibility across endpoints and tighter control over application security. Measures like enforcing multi-factor authentication, eliminating passwords through single sign-on, enforcing role-based access, and context-based policies, they all double down on never trust and always verify strategy. We would love to hear your take on that, Chase.
Yeah, well, I mean, you just said the majority of what we've talked about for, nearly 15, 17 years in ZT as far as the evolution goes. I mean, there's some very fundamental things that I think we have to solve for in the security space to make things better. Getting rid of passwords is huge because A, no one wants to use passwords, and B, it's one of the number one avenues that organizations are being compromised with. I think the last numbers I saw said that there's about 90 individual passwords for each user on each device. So you do the math, those numbers get really, really big really quick. So if you can solve for passwords, you're solving for a very, very large area of potential compromise. Taking care of the device, making sure that it's patched, making sure that it can only access what it gets to, keeping users limited, not having excessive privileges and the capabilities that are needed to crawl through networks is also extremely necessary. The goal in this space, like we've talked about, is to make sure that you address the core requirements for the adversary, not necessarily for the end user on your side. Most people kind of think, like to your point, that I need more than I actually use for the purposes of my work. If that's the case, then those other things are only going to be used by adversaries to do malicious activity when they get into a network. The ability to have command and control, lock those things down, isolate it, keep the users from being the entity that causes the compromise, and using stuff that is relatively simplistic in nature and does not impact negatively the user experience are going to be well accepted. I mean, that's the end state that we're trying to get to. When you talk about what zero trust looks like in a perfect world, what you just said equals ZT for everybody everywhere. Well, it depends. This is an evolution that takes time. Some organizations, depending on how far they are into this and how mature their processes are, can be there relatively quickly. Some other organizations that are just getting into this, it may take you years to get towards that end state. However, that timeline can be exponentially decreased using vendor solutions that allow you to get towards a more zero trust state at speed and at scale with policy engines that make this controllable. It's kind of interesting when you see organizations will ask that question: how can I get there faster? How do I do this quicker, better? And the reality is, you'll get there as fast as you can get there based on the capabilities you're aligning to solve those problems. And this is where I think that there's a difference for people to understand vendor solutions from vendors that understand what zero trust looks like and the core capabilities and components that are necessary and can operate at speed and scale are what will help you get towards a zero trust end state faster. But remember, you're only going to get there as fast as you can align to that space and keep moving things forward. It may take you a while, but that's okay. As long as you're continually improving, the benefits will reveal themselves.
Mm-hmm. For organizations that do manage to successfully implement a zero trust model, knowing how well they did is important, right? So on what parameters do they measure their success?
I think there's a couple parameters that are really useful to get towards an understanding of where you are in the world of ZT. And one of those parameters would be seeing more than what you saw before. Are you able to have a better asset inventory? Do you see more users and devices? Do you have a better cognizance and understanding of what's going on in that infrastructure? If you're improving visibility and you're improving the capability to know who's doing what where, you're getting towards a more zero trust end state. I think what you see from organizations that do this well is that they kind of focus on that because that's the reality of where compromises will begin and occur, and you're aligning your capabilities to continually improve command and control, visibility, automation, orchestration, those things. I don't think in reality anyone will say that they're ever going to get towards 100% of all time real time accountability on every asset all the time. Things move just too fast. You have lots of ins and outs. But when you get towards a more zero trust state, you're getting up towards closer to 100% knowledge state of those pieces of infrastructure, and doing so is going to help you get there. And then lastly, what I would say is what you see from organizations that get towards a zero trust end state is they get rid of things that are usually double and triple dipping. And what I mean by that is I've seen organizations that have 2 or 3 or 4 UEM solutions. They move to ZT, they choose the right technology that solves the right problem, and they go to one. So there's a budget benefit there as well. So in reality, to make a long answer short, you should see an optimization of visibility, an optimization of understanding of who's doing what where, and you should be able to get rid of things that you didn't need that weren't solving the problem.
Exactly. Well, the transition to remote work has not been easy for any teams, let alone IT. So with a perimeter-less workspace, a lot of us have been forced into zero trust as a reality. How important do you think is it for the organization to embrace zero trust, especially in a time like this?
Yeah, I mean, 2020 has been a year of ever-changing space, right? March 13th, 2020 is the day I call ZT Day. That's the day we were all told, basically globally, that this COVID thing was real. Go be remote, go home. And when that happened, we were all pushed way outside of the perimeter. And where we are now is not somewhere where we're going back to work anytime soon. I think I saw a study recently that said 27% of the global workforce will never return to the office, which is a staggering number. So if that's the case, if we accept that that's what's going on, and we understand that this is where we're going to be in some sort of shape or form, and we're going to be more cloud, more remote, more mobile, the only way to approach the problem and do it intelligently is to apply strategy that deals with those realities, which is the zero trust mantra, which is the zero trust strategic approach. And that's this one that makes the most sense. 84% of organizations that I've talked to, I think in my recent data, are moving towards zero trust now this year because of the move that's taken place because of remote work. I bet that number is probably even higher if you ask them towards the end of the year. We're all going to be remote. That means we're outside the perimeter. That means we have to remove the avenues of compromise and the hard-coded sort of areas that will allow compromise to occur, which is the strategic initiative that Zero Trust deals with and has dealt with for the last 17 years.
When it comes to early adoption, obviously the government and federal agencies have led the charge. So do you think data protection laws and privacy legislations like GDPR, LGPD and CCPA will accelerate zero trust adoption across other industries?
I think that they're applicable. I think that they're useful for us to understand what is of value to different organizations. Like if I look at PCI, I can immediately understand what data is valuable for organizations that touch credit card information. If I look at GDPR, I can understand what data is valuable for organizations that look at privacy in Europe. I think that there's value in being able to ascribe to those, and Zero Trust fundamentally deals with the value of data and helps us to know that that is what, at the end of the day, we're all responsible for protecting. All security, all cybersecurity revolves around data at some point. That's what bad guys go after. So I think that there's value in those different compliance requirements coming online. I do get a little bit concerned when we sort of see people that wrap their heads specifically around only subscribing to solving for compliance of data. That's a piece of Zero Trust and it's useful, but it is not the end state. So I tell people all the time, be compliant, get compliant, know what your value of your data is, especially if it's those sort of cross-correlated data things, but don't stop there, go further.
Great. That brings our session to a close, Dr. Chase. Once again, thank you for joining us and sharing your valuable insights. For you guys, we hope the session has been helpful, offered some sense of clarity on getting started with Zero Trust, the challenges you can expect and how UEM can empower you in your journey. I'm sure you will have still more questions. Well, we'll be available on Discord channel, so feel free to ask away. And do stick around for the rest of HexCon. You will have fun, and there is always be something new to learn. Thank you.